Western Illinois. My name is Frank Cullen. I'm Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Global Innovation Policy Center. And I want to first thank our partners for this important virtual conference, the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce. Their incredible hard work and support for today's event has really made it possible. And honestly, without that help, we simply could not be doing today's event. And I want to make a special thank you to Peoria Chamber President and CEO Joshua Gunn, and also Vice President Sharnika Cagle for all their hard work. I can just tell you that we pulled this event together pretty quickly with the help of the Congressman and his team and with the Chamber, and we're just delighted to be able to discuss these important topics. And of course, it's really a pleasure and privilege to have as our special guest, Congressman Darin LaHood. Congressman LaHood is to be commended for all he has done on behalf of his district and the people of his district during this crisis in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And we thank him not only for taking time to be with us today, knowing how busy his schedule is, but also for everything he has done during these difficult times. Congress has showed great leadership, and Congressman LaHood should be commended for all he has done for the people of the 18th District, who are fortunate to have such an effective representative in Congress. So, Congressman, thank you very much on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Frank.
Of course. The Chamber has long supported the need for a strong domestic intellectual property system to encourage innovation, drive economic growth, and create jobs. Recently, the Chamber launched our Discover and Deliver campaign to highlight the incredible work that's being done literally across the nation to address this COVID crisis. I think it's important to remember that without our domestic innovators and the incredible work that they are doing, we simply would not be able to get through this crisis. That's, of course, all the clinical trials and research projects that are going on, but also simply being able to connect like we are today for virtual meetings through amazing technology that's really been spearheaded by American industry. You know, American IP industries support over 45 million jobs. They're responsible for over 38% of our GDP. They play a huge role not only in our trade, but also in the creativity and ingenuity that sets America apart. You know, it's really remarkable to think that in Illinois alone, there are 2.9 million jobs and over $53.5 billion related to IP-intensive industries. These are impressive numbers, and of course, they're going to help us through this crisis. So without further ado, I'm going to just remind folks that this Discover and Deliver campaign that the Chamber has started puts a real spotlight on those local innovators in districts such as Congressman LaHood's, who are working in the Peoria area tirelessly to try to overcome this COVID pandemic. And we have on our U.S. Chamber of Commerce website an interactive map that highlights research projects and clinical trials throughout the country. And there's just tremendous work being done everywhere. Please, if you have a chance, go to our site. You'll hear more about that during this program, but it's a fascinating story to tell, and it's really one of American ingenuity. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Joshua Gunn, who, as I said, serves as President and CEO of the Greater Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce. Now, Mr. Gunn, despite being new to Peoria, has really jumped in and shown terrific leadership in just the few short weeks he's been here. He's only been here about 2 weeks, but he's already showing great resolve in terms of helping to bring the business community together. He previously served as Vice President at the Durham Chamber of Commerce in North Carolina for the past 4 years, and he's excited about the future for Central Illinois and looking forward to really enhancing and growing that economic potential in this region. So, of course, the Peoria Chamber of Commerce, as many of you know, has been a leader for over 100 years in terms of bringing people together in the business community. And I just want to congratulate Joshua and his entire talented team for all their hard work, and also thank him for partnering with us today. So with that, Joshua, I turn it over to you, and thanks again for allowing us to be partners with you in this very important event.
Yes, thank you, Frank, and thank you everyone for attending this very important conversation. And of course, thank you, Representative LaHood, for taking a moment to address our region. I will say, Frank, you shorted me on my seniority. I've been here 2 months. You were right the first time. So a little longer than 2 weeks. So I've been in this seat for only about 8 weeks and have been impressed, enthused, excited about just how well this region has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is really a testament to the commitment to the community that Peorians have, Central Illinoisans have, right? Western Illinoisans have. I mean, it is amazing to me watching our businesses remain resilient and the philanthropic dollars that are given out in this community, our research community, our healthcare community. Everyone is united around an effort to make sure that not only are we safe and healthy, but we bounce back economically even stronger than before. So I'm honored to be here in this region and in this seat at the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce and CEO Council. And I also get the pleasure today, 8 weeks into the gig, I get to introduce a U.S. Congressman. So this is pretty cool. I'm honored to have that privilege. And some of you on the call may know Congressman LaHood. He has served the 18th District of Illinois since 2015, but is a lifelong Peorian. He's born and raised here, a third-generation Peorian, in fact, and the LaHood family has served the state of Illinois and the Peoria area for 3 generations. Prior to his time in Congress, he also served in the state Senate in Illinois from 2011 to 2015 and has, throughout his tenure, been a champion for our business community, for economic development, and ensuring that we remain resilient and embrace business in the state of Illinois. And, I'm just really excited to have your partnership, Congressman. Our organization is excited to get the chance to work with you as we build an even better Peoria region. But we're not the only folks in your district, so we have to also shout out the 19 counties across central and west central Illinois, from McLean County and Bloomington Normal, Adams County, and of course right here in Peoria, the Peoria area, Tri-County. 710,000 constituents are in your district, and we're all grateful for your leadership and service. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Representative Darin LaHood.
Well, thank you, Joshua. And let me just welcome you to Peoria. We're happy you're here and look forward to working with you in a collaborative way. I've heard great things about you and the work that you were engaged in North Carolina, and welcome you with open arms to Peoria. So thank you for the nice introduction, and
Thank you.
Look forward to meeting you in person too, Joshua. And let me just thank the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and obviously our local Chamber of Commerce for putting together this initiative, the Discover and Deliver initiative. Let me just acknowledge all of the people on the call here today for your commitment and dedication, obviously to healthcare and our medical profession. I know we have some great people on the call here today. And I want to give a shout out and thank our healthcare professionals, whether it's our nurses, whether it's our doctors, whether it's our researchers in the Peoria area and across our district, for everything you've done over the last 6 months here under very stressful times. But we are blessed in the Peoria area to have such quality medical healthcare, medical professionals and healthcare professionals. So I want to just acknowledge their commitment and dedication to everything that they've done through this crisis. So thank you for that. And I know we have some others on the call here from Springfield and elsewhere, so want to welcome them here today, and obviously look forward to the dialogue and the discussion moving forward. And I tell people I learn every day in this job, and when we think about how we have been affected by COVID and how disruptive and challenging it has been, both on the financial side and on the healthcare side. But this is something that we are resilient, we are a resourceful country, and we're going to get through this. This will pass, but it's learning through this process and how it affects things that is vitally important, and hopefully taking those ideas and those messages back to Washington, D.C. to advocate as we look at for further ways, whether it's allocating resources, whether it's changing public policy, whether it's suggesting new legislation that helps both on the healthcare front with the pandemic and then also on the financial side of it. It's important that we get this right. And I know, Frank, we may talk about this in our comments, but if you go back and look at when the pandemic hit, the U.S. government doesn't get a lot of credit for doing things quickly, but I think our response was quick. It was swift in a lot of ways. We passed 4 bills in a short period of time. We allocated and appropriated $3.6 trillion, the most money ever spent in the history of the country in this short period of time. But arguably, we stabilized the economy. We gave confidence to healthcare workers and professionals to get through this. Wasn't perfect. There are things we could have done differently. But when you look at those resources and what we did in terms of public policy, it did have an effect and helped us get us through this difficult time. And so as we move to the next step in looking towards obviously getting a cure or a treatment or a vaccine, we got to continue to be engaged. And so again, I want to thank all of the medical professionals and people on the call here today, and look forward to your comments and discussion. And again, doing all I can to help assist and partner with you as we move through this these challenging and disruptive times. So again, Joshua, thanks for the introduction. Frank, look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Congressman. And obviously, it goes without saying, as I mentioned in my opening comments, that during a crisis such as this, the American people look for leadership. And Congress responded. You pointed out how effectively and quickly Congress responded to this crisis. And on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all our members, I just want to express our appreciation, not only for what you're doing in terms of trying to support efforts to find a cure and new treatments, but also simply for helping people get through with their daily lives and survive in tough economic conditions. So the steps that Congress took were incredibly meaningful to your constituents and to all the American people. And we certainly want to tell you how much we appreciate all your hard work. So thank you again for that. I would be remiss if I didn't put in a little bit of a plug again for our interactive map, our Discover and Deliver campaign map, which is really a fascinating look at all the clinical trials and research projects that are happening right in Illinois and across the country. And on our interactive map, which breaks down where all these clinical trials are taking place by congressional district, it shows there are over 95 clinical trials for COVID-19 and related therapeutics and vaccines taking place across Illinois. And 3 are taking place right in Congressman LaHood's district. It's amazing that thousands of people, thousands of Illinois residents are involved in these clinical trials and are pushing forward to try to help us get to a cure and more effective treatments. Congressman, I'm curious how you feel about why you believe it's important that we have these cutting-edge clinical trials in your very own district, and what are some of the benefits these trials bring to COVID-19 patients, but also to your community in terms of economic activity?
Well, thanks for the question, Frank. And we're very proud to have a number of these cutting-edge clinical trials going on in our district, the 18th district. But I think it's a reflection of the quality and the depth of our medical community in Peoria, because these clinical trials just don't happen everywhere across the country. You have to have the personnel, you have to have the research capability, you have to have the resources. And when I think about our Peoria area, whether it's Unity Point or whether it's OSF, the depth of our medical professionals there, I think reflects that. That's first and foremost. Secondly, when you look at how essential it is that we do these clinical trials to the future of finding a cure or a vaccine or a treatment, it's vitally important. And we have allocated and spent a lot of money at the federal level and continue to do that, working with the top PhDs and researchers and scientists across the country, working with the private sector and the public sector. But to have those at least 3, maybe more going on in the Peoria area, again, is remarkable, as you mentioned. And I know that we're looking at a number of things related to the plasma from COVID patients that have recovered, looking at blood thinners, and looking at other clinical trials. And obviously the results from those are going to be important to putting together the research that can go into a cure or vaccine or a treatment. But again, I go back to this. Some people think that these clinical trials happen in, San Francisco or New York or other big cities, but it's happening in Peoria, Illinois. And again, I don't think the public is aware of that. And again, I go back to the quality the really substantial and merit-based medical professionals that we have in Peoria, and that's why it's happening. And obviously, the results that come from these clinical trials will be important. And I know, obviously, at the federal government, Operation Warp Speed is going on. I know the coronavirus task force is working minute by minute on trying to do everything we can, because ultimately we know COVID is going to pass, but only when we give confidence to the American people through a vaccine, cure, or treatment. And so Peoria plays a small role in that, and we're happy to do it.
Well, I think you also raised a really good point. You know, the title of today's event is All of Nation Effort to Beat COVID-19, but you hit on a really key point, and that is the mobilization of all resources at the government level. There's truly an all of government response as well. So when we look at this pandemic and how we're going to get through it, it's really that public-private partnership that is something the Chamber has celebrated and really looks at as such an important key component of how we work through this crisis. I think most folks don't realize that while much of the foundational research and a lot of the good science is done through government institutions, through research institutions and universities, industry plays a huge role here. And for every dollar that's spent by government, anywhere from 10 to up to 100 times is spent by industry to try to build on that foundational science and those discoveries that are really leading us forward to remarkable cures, not only hopefully for COVID, but also for so many other ailments that the American people and people around the world struggle with. So I think your point about this being an all of government and all of nation approach is tremendously important. You know, early on in the pandemic, one of the real challenges we had was the lack of personal protection equipment, of course, frequently called PPE, to adequately protect, particularly our healthcare personnel and our essential workers. Now, you serve as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and I will remind your constituents, this is a tremendously important committee that has a broad impact on the American economy and also the safety of the American people in terms of all the things it does with our trade. So what role can trade policy play to help ensure that the workers on the front lines have the PPE needed to stay safe throughout this coronavirus crisis?
Well, Frank, thanks for the comments on that. Couple things. I think what we saw when the pandemic hit in March and really through the months of April and May and June was the fact that we were deficient in terms of our supplies of PPE. And that's the first point. Second point is we also were very reliant and I think vulnerable to the supply chain being in China and overseas. And so that has caused many of us on the Ways and Means Committee and others in Congress in a bipartisan way to look at how do we fix that vulnerability, the fact that we were so reliant on China and other countries around the world for our PPE and for a lot of the sanitation and the hygiene equipment that was necessary. And that was problematic. And so moving forward, we are looking at how we remedy that vulnerability. A couple things are being looked at. Moving some of those supply chains back to the US, particularly on pharmaceuticals, generic drugs, and the PPE. All of those, again, upwards to 90% of those products came from China. So we've been looking at how do we bring those supply chains back? Well, you bring those back by incentivizing companies to come back to the U.S. To produce those products. Obviously, we have the capability in the U.S. to do that, but it will take some incentive. So we have introduced legislation in the Ways and Means Committee. We hope to get past that, particularly look at tax credits and tax incentives for those companies to move those supply chains back to the U.S. Pharmaceutical drugs, generics, and PPE, whether it's the plexiglass, whether it's the mask, whether it's those other things, and reducing our reliance on China and other countries moving forward. So that's an aspect that we're looking at. Also, Buy America provisions. Those can be somewhat controversial, but those are being looked at in terms of how they help to have that production here in the U.S. We don't, this pandemic, maybe once in 100 years. However, we got to be prepared for when that happens. It could happen 2 years from now or 3 years from now. And so again, when I talked in my opening comments about learning from our mistakes or our vulnerabilities, I think this is one way we have to do this. So I'm confident in the next stimulus bill, Frank, there will be tax incentives that are significant to bringing those supply chains back to the U.S., having much of what I mentioned produced in the United States. And again, that helps with our economy here. It helps with American jobs, helps with American innovation, which is essential to the future of the country also. So I think it's a win-win. But again, I think it's going to take public policy changes and legislation to effectuate that.
Well, thank you for that. And we also appreciate your understanding of the important role that trade plays for our overall economy. As you know, the Chamber has been at the forefront of many of the efforts to ensure that not only our industries, but the American people have what they need during this crisis, and of course, in terms of benefiting our overall economy. So thank you for your hard work on the Ways and Means Committee, truly critical to our nation's future and to our economy. You've discussed some of the ways that U.S. intellectual property framework has really become increasingly important as the country really has to pivot and respond to this coronavirus crisis. Now, attempts to stimulate the U.S. economy and American competitiveness are, of course, tied to a lot of these related issues. Can you tell us about the ways, in your opinion, effective innovation policy here domestically, including appropriate intellectual property protections, has helped really sustain and encourage the research and development of COVID-19 treatments, and how that might relate to the work that's going on in your own district?
Well, sure. Frank, thanks for the question on intellectual property. I mean, it's the PhDs and people that work all across this property system.
There we go.
If you don't have an intellectual property system that is based on rules and enforcement, you run into real difficulties on that. And so, I mean, it's highlighted in a lot of ways what's happened in countries like China, where our intellectual property, the theft of that is a real significant problem, and we continue to deal with that daily. But that, fortunately, Frank, is not something we have to deal with in the U.S. because of those laws and rules that put a real emphasis on, and a real credit on those scientists that produce that. And so enforcement is a big part of that. I spent 10 years as a state and federal prosecutor, and the Department of Justice plays a big role in that, and our federal government, in making sure that we are protecting that intellectual property, whether it's our drug companies, whether it's the work done at CDC, whether it's the work done at HHS, or the National Institutes of Health. Giving credit where credit is due, protecting that intellectual property, and going after people that engaged in the theft of that. And it is a problem that we have to deal with on a daily basis, Frank. But if you adequately protect it and you have those rules and enforcement mechanisms in place, you're going to get results that are going to be beneficial to the American people and to people all over the world. People look to the U.S. system as a system that is the foundation for innovation. It's no coincidence, when you look at the fact that we lead the world when it comes to technology and intellectual property capabilities. You look at the tech companies, whether it's Apple, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, Amazon, we are the envy of the world. And that's part of the reason why China and others are on a daily basis trying to steal our intellectual property. And they want to beat us there. But again, the freedom that our country allows for people to prosper and thrive and have have their product and their intellectual discoveries put into law is essential. And so on the Ways and Means Committee, we constantly are looking for ways to protect that, put it into law, and make sure you have proper enforcement there, because we all benefit from that down the road.
Well, I really appreciate your mention of the impact some of the unexpected consequences of dealing with this crisis have created for the American people. It's really remarkable. I think most people know that if you have a successful product, there's probably a good likelihood it's either going to be copied or ripped off, and someone's going to try to put a counterfeit out there to get your hard-earned dollar, and maybe you wind up disappointed with that. But during the COVID crisis, it's a matter of life and death. When we see, counterfeit PPEs, when we see, to your point, things that are substandard that the medical profession relies on, healthcare professionals rely on every day, finding their way into the supply chain, it's a really serious issue. And we've seen everything from counterfeit masks to counterfeit toilet paper during this crisis. And the American people are the victims of this type of crime. So it's tremendously important when we're talking about the health and safety of American people that we do remember that important role intellectual property policies and enforcement tools play in terms of keeping Americans safe. So thank you, Congressman, for raising that important point. I think many people are so busy just trying to deal with the new normal and the unique circumstances we're all confronted with, that sometimes they're not taking the time to think about things that they shouldn't have to worry about, which is like the safety of their family if they're getting substandard products. So we appreciate your focus on that and hard work. And of course, trade agreements play a big role in terms of how we ensure that American intellectual property policies are at least the model upon which other countries may want to build their systems. So again, thank you for your insights on that. You've also spoken a lot about the importance of getting Americans back to work. And we'd like to do that as soon as we can, of course, to restart the U.S. economy. And the Chamber has tried to be a partner working with government, working with industry, working with the American people to try to make sure that we do that in a safe fashion. And as you know, identifying effective therapeutics to treat COVID, not just a vaccine, that's going to be key to achieving this goal. Could you talk a little bit about how innovative therapeutics supported by a strong IP system will really put our communities on the path to a return to health and hopefully back to work soon?
Yeah, Frank, thanks for that. Obviously, that's on everybody's mind, whether it's my constituents that I talk to throughout my district, you talk to families, as kids go back to school over the last couple of weeks here, it's on everybody's mind in terms of when we will have the therapeutics or cure or a vaccine. And so it becomes, again, more and more important that collaboration and that effort by the private sector, by government agencies to continue to work towards finding that. And we all know that'll happen at some point, but it's perfected. I would also just say some people get frustrated that, oh, why aren't we going faster? And you have to let, obviously, the medical professionals and the people that are engaged in this do their work and do it properly. There are FDA requirements on doing that. But again, I have confidence that we're headed in the right direction. We have allocated a lot of money at the federal level through those bills that I mentioned at the beginning of our call to move towards this. And so it is obviously imperative that we continue to work through the processes. We learn through the research and the therapeutics to get where we need to go. But I can just tell you, there are so many people and entities that are working on this to get it done. The other part that will be important, Frank, is how do you scale up the manufacturing of the vaccine or the cure, whatever that treatment is. The manufacturing of that, we haven't talked a lot about that, but I mean, you can think about the scale of what this is going to entail, and it's going to be massive. And so we're going to have to be prepared to move into that manufacturing part of that and make sure that we have that. And then, of course, there's people out there, unfortunately, that don't want to get vaccinated, and we'll have to deal with that from a public policy standpoint. So there are a number of issues moving forward, but ultimately, I have all the confidence in the world we're going to get those therapeutics or a cure or a treatment and vaccine here before too long. Frank, I want to mention one other thing that I think it's important that we haven't talked about is in the bills that we passed early on, we changed the law to allow for a lot more, the ability for more telehealth and telemedicine. And I can't tell you how impactful that was in a district like mine that is very rural. My district is contiguous with the state of Iowa and Missouri, and I go all the way over the Mississippi River. And we changed a number of those laws to allow many of the hospitals across this country the ability to do telehealth and telemedicine. And so, people that are nervous or scared to not want to drive to Peoria or drive to Springfield or drive to Bloomington Normal had the ability to do that. And, it's been up 30%, maybe 40%. But moving forward, now that we've perfected some of that and we're working towards that, I think we have to make that permanent. And I know we're working with CMS on the reimbursement part of that, which is the big part for hospital providers and medical providers. But it's essential that I think there's good things that will come out of COVID, and this is one of them, in doing more of that. And I know that we're going to have experts with Dr. Sammer and Dr. Vaz on here, but it's important for our rural communities. And the last point that I would make on it, obviously rural broadband and connectivity plays a vital role in that. So we have to think in parallel terms when we think about telehealth and telemedicine. We have to make that investment with communications, because the digital divide that is out there and that connectivity, we have an obligation and responsibility to invest. And ironically, Frank, there's been a collaboration in Congress now with many of my urban colleagues, Democrat colleagues, that now see kids that don't have good connectivity at home that are in our urban areas. And, it's frightening to look at the number of kids that went out of school last March and never logged on again because they didn't have that connectivity. And so I think we're going to see some funding that's going to go to that investment in connectivity. And that's good for all of us. Our rural areas, our urban areas, helps with telehealth and telemedicine, but also is going to be essential to the education of our kids in both places. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you, Frank.
Well, Congressman, those are hugely important points. We know that many people are increasingly doing online during this pandemic. The ability to have a telehealth system that can serve folks across the country, not just in the rural communities, is advancements that would not be possible without domestic American innovation. So you're 100% right to raise that issue. This meeting alone would be almost impossible without having the capacity to bring so many people into a virtual conference today to hear your thoughts and the thoughts of our expert panelists on how we're going to work through this crisis. So American innovation is helping in so many ways, along with the American creative industries, helping to keep people sane who are stuck at home and looking for ways to entertain their families, looking for ways to educate their families, as you appropriately pointed out, are dependent on the capacity for technologies that can deliver the important information our students need and connect them with their teachers. And of course, there's a huge commercial side to this in terms of how people are simply able to do business and also get what they need to survive during this pandemic. So you raise such an important point, and I'm delighted you did so. We certainly support the need for increased broadband capacity and capability. At the Chamber, we've tried to work hard on those issues to increase that benefit to the American people, and we look forward to more progress being done in that area. Congressman, I did get one additional question. I'm not going to dive into it quite as deeply from one of your constituents, talking about some of the challenges facing your constituents with travel restrictions, particularly as it relates to international travel. One of the questions was about the availability of testing in the region and in Illinois. Much of that is handled at the county and the local level, so I don't think it's necessary for you to address that particular issue unless you'd like to. But I just want to remind folks what a great resource your office is and what a tremendous staff you have working for you. And constituents who have questions, whether it's regarding issues like international travel restrictions or issues related to federal issues, I encourage them to contact your district offices or your office in Washington to really get the benefit of your great team and the hard work you're doing every day to help the people of the 18th district. So I encourage people to reach out to Congressman LaHood's staff and to his office, and also appreciate the fact that your staff takes time every day to help constituents with a myriad of issues that go well beyond just this current crisis. And we want to thank your team and the professionalism that they show and their willingness also to partner with us. So thank you, Congressman, for all you're doing there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. You're welcome to stay around. I know how busy your schedule is. Have a few moments to stick with us and want to make some closing comments, I'd invite you to do so. But before we turn over to our panel discussion, I'll just ask you, any closing comments now before we wrap up this section of the program?
Well, Frank, thanks. It went by quick here, and happy to follow up on the individual that you mentioned on the testing capabilities and what we need to be doing. But listen, this is a team effort between everybody in our communities and working together. And we, at the federal level, obviously there are lots of questions and issues that we need to be addressing, but we want to be helpful. We want to be a resource. I remind my staff all the time, we work for the 710,000 people that we represent across the 18th district. And so we look forward to that continued partnership, and anything that we talked about today that anybody wants to follow up on, please follow up with me directly or our staff. And we look forward to continuing to work in a collaborative way to get a cure and a vaccine and a treatment that's going to be beneficial to my district and the entire country. So Frank, thanks again for that, and look forward to listening to the next panel.
Congressman, thanks again for all your time today and your great insights. It's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague at the Chamber, Patrick Kilbride, who leads our policy team's work. Patrick has a wealth of experience on a wide range of issues, and he's been a real leader along with other members of our team on our Discover and Deliver campaign. It's my pleasure to introduce our Senior Vice President at the Global Innovation Policy Center to lead today's discussion with some real experts from the state of Illinois to discuss things that are happening that are really going to help us through this crisis. So Patrick, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Frank, and thank you, Congressman LaHood. The Congressman talked about a team effort, and we're really fortunate to have three of the local superstars in Illinois who are leading the team in Dr. Samar Sadar, who's the Chief Medical Officer at Unity Point Health. We have Dr. John Vozenilek, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Jump Simulation at the OSF Healthcare, and John Conrad, the President and CEO of the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Since our time is short, I'm not going to jump into detailed bios, but we'll really just jump into a Q&A with these experts. You know, and first of all, we see governments, industry, hospitals, universities, and nonprofits all working together here. We're going to talk about those partnerships a bit. But first of all, the hospitals really found themselves on the front line. And Dr. Sadar, I wonder if we could start with you, you know, with this unprecedented situation, at least in our lifetimes, that we found ourselves in late February, early March. What did it look like at Unity Point Health in sort of that early steps to care for patients, and how has that developed?
It was really a stressful time because our hospitals in the U.S. are really built like fast cars. And based on what we were seeing in Italy and New York, people who were getting ill with the coronavirus, developing COVID-19, were really more like a Jeep. And they were going to be there, they're not going to get there very quickly, meaning they were getting admitted, they required a lot of resources, and they stayed in the hospital for a prolonged period of time. So on the fly, we needed to shut down what we were doing, adjust how people came through the hospital, adjust for the fact that a lot of these patients were going to require a lot more resources on top of the isolation requirements, and people couldn't come and visit their families. So that innovation of the Zoom and FaceTime and how do we communicate with patients' families, and potential shortages of doctors and nurses had to all be taken into account. Complete surge plans, increase in ICU capacity, and really some of the successes from the federal government standpoint and industry were the number of beds that became available, number of single-use ventilators for the support of the patients that were developed very quickly. All that was really what we were doing at the beginning. And having to delay the care of patients that were scheduled for surgeries was something that we needed to keep in mind. Also being focused on mental health as a system and a region, especially behavioral health, immediately thinking about how do we develop a system to develop mental health, knowing that of this situation were going to last quite a bit, not only at the beginning, whether it was 2-3 months of COVID-19, but down the road. And those were some of our focus, developing that telemedicine capability quickly and managing our patients and being ready for the influx of patients.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership and tireless efforts, not just to you, but to all of your colleagues at Unity Point Health. One of the striking things, I think, over the last few months is seen that while cases rose dramatically in the second wave, deaths have slowed. And so, I'd be curious, both from you and Dr. Vozenilek, and I heard Congressman LaHood, John, call you Dr. Voz, so if you don't mind, I'll adopt that shorthand. It sounds like a great moniker. But, at OSF, you had a similar experience. You had to jump right in, rapid reaction. How did the OSF Innovation Center and the JUMP simulation program come at this challenge? And for both of you, what's changed over the last few months to help you save so many more lives?
So many healthcare systems and discrete entities dealt with the situation with their current toolkit and revised their current approaches using standard techniques, traditional methodologies, but then bolstering them. So JUMP and its partnership with the University of Illinois and its particular strength there has the opportunity to observe how work can be transformed and improved. And so in short, we converted our innovation center into a rapid action center using digital health methodologies to reach out to more people than has ever been in our charge, to reach secondary service areas, and in fact, to provide a service to the state of Illinois called the Pandemic Health Worker Program. It's a free telehealth service which reaches essentially through the entire middle section of the state of Illinois, well beyond OSF's traditional catchment. We were able to accomplish this by thinking differently and leveraging different resources than are in the traditional toolkit with our partnership with the University of Illinois, College of Medicine, colleges of engineering, et cetera, and to really rethink how care needed to be developed, inclusive of approaches which involved machine learning and artificial intelligence to identify patients even though they were being monitored at home, to debulk our systems of care, to not have them stay in the hospital if it wasn't necessary, and to extend care to homes and other situations that are non-traditional. This was a particular methodology that was developed at JUMP and has been deployed at JUMP over the last several months and serving in the order of more than 100,000 individuals across the middle section of our state of Illinois. I would like to just convey further that in immediate action, OSF partnered with the University of Illinois to fund COVID testing. The saliva-based test that the University of Illinois is now moving to distribute across the nation is received funding from the JUMP program. And in partnership, we have developed second generation COVID tests that should make the availability of saliva-based testing more ubiquitous and frankly at the point of care. So again, rethinking traditional systems, rethinking traditional mechanisms of care, and to leverage the innovation, methodologies, and frankly, the American know-how to get things done differently in service of other people.
Again, thank you. I think it's really tremendous what you've been able to achieve in a very short amount of time. And Dr. Sauter, if you wanted to comment on just sort of the, I think the very fortuitous change in the death rates as well.
Yes, the testing part was critical. And we partner with a local lab that happened to have a specific type of machinery, and we happen to have the expertise to combine that expertise with that machinery that is for genetic testing. And we were able to get on top of testing pretty quickly. So through that Redditus lab, a lot of the state of Illinois testing runs through that lab. And without the know-how of our pathology team, that probably would have been a problem. And I can tell you that I called Congressman LaHood very early because the testing in the hospital is critical for the flow of patients. Who do you decide to isolate? who doesn't need isolation. So you could save on that PPE early on when we were stressed. And we did receive the emergency supplies from the federal government and from the state government that were critical. Other things that affect mortality is identify the people early. So the testing is part of that. Monitor them properly. Like Dr. Vozenilek said, extending that care into the home so that we could bring them back if they were deteriorating was critical without bugging down the hospital. And as time goes, we are always learning and learning from our neighbor states, learning from New York. How do we deliver oxygen more properly? The turning of patients, the dexamethasone, the research studies, the convalescent plasma, and people just being more conscious about the physical distancing and the masking is probably all playing a role in the improvement in the mortality of the disease. And we're lucky in Illinois, and especially in central Illinois, between the hospitals, which we work together, the University of Illinois, and the health department. We had regular meetings to pool our resources and move our region forward. The other area is medications. And we as Unity Point Health are part of a collaborative called Civica to make medications in the United States preferably, especially generic medications. So one of the main concerns was medications that are to sedate patients, antibiotics, and that collaborative has benefited greatly from the reduction of regulation at the federal level so that we could increase and quickly develop the infrastructure to have those medications available and at the time of a crisis. So that was critical for us too.
Let's bring John Conrad in on that point. John, you know, you guys are really looking forward. You know, the doctors have to look at what they have now to be available to them. You guys are looking forward to what could be. What, you know, so as we look at the race for vaccines and safe and effective therapies, what is the presence of your industry in Illinois and its contribution to this effort?
Yeah, so the life sciences industry in Illinois is large. We have over 88,000 direct jobs in the life sciences industry. We're actually home to the second largest biopharma concentration in the U.S., which provides the state with $98 billion in economic output. We're also home, obviously, to world-class academic research institutions and medical centers like the panelists that are joining me here in this discussion. Our members right away dedicated themselves to fighting COVID-19. You know, companies like AbbVie started working immediately with China and other groups looking at some of the drugs that they have in their pipeline if it could be used to fight the COVID-19. Other members of ours, like Abbott, is a clear leader in testing. They've been producing millions of tests to help kind of fill the void of testing that we had. I mean, if you're really looking at it, we went from almost 0 tests at the beginning of March to now I think there are over 144 groups that have tests that have been approved by the FDA as part of their emergency use authorization. Our member companies, also companies that don't necessarily focus on COVID-related medicines, immediately stepped up to help our frontline healthcare workers. IBIO members have provided over $80 million in direct support for the most impacted communities and have donated through our organization over 1 million products of PPE and testing supplies to be used in Illinois medical centers. So we immediately came forward as a community to step up, and the companies who are really kind of pushing forward on this now, we're getting behind them and really trying to help them move forward. So.
Terrific. And Dr. Voz, maybe you could say a word about some of those approaches that are being tested, because you know, my next question for you is sort of what does this look like in Illinois? How are we participating in testing these various approaches in clinical trials at your hospitals and universities?
Right. So, of course, a delicate issue as we rapidly move to examine the best methodologies and keep folks safe at the same time, particular constraint. This is where having this academic powerhouse, the University of Illinois, has particular value and brings particular expertise. From just the investment that we made in COVID-related technologies, there have been over 20 disclosures of new technologies that will make their way into some use with the appropriate testing, which include things which are novel materials to reduce the adherence of virus to physical objects, all the way through novel testing methodologies. Again, as we move forward, there is this great deal of caution as we enhance safety. We have to keep the individual's safety at the foremost, but we're moving as rapidly forward as we can. And certainly, there's been no restriction to date on the willingness to provide excellent care and innovation for the patients who are out there and suffering from COVID, and frankly, the community. In terms of economic development, it is absolutely essential to restore people to functional roles inside society, from school teachers to neurosurgeons. This is a big deal. Testing, the security of our individuals, and the availability of techniques and technologies that keep folks safe is the thing that's going to solve for this pandemic.
Let's talk about partnerships for a bit, because I think that's an important piece of this response. Is how do you create an ecosystem, and do we have an ecosystem where very diverse partners, government, industry, university, nonprofits, can come together and do clinical trials effectively on a very short scale? So I'd be curious, Dr. Sauter, what does that look like at Unity Point Health? What are some of the clinical trials that you're doing now, and who all is involved in those?
We were lucky that I was actually in charge of our research department as I took over to become the chief medical officer. So I knew all the details of what we could do and we couldn't do. So when COVID started, I immediately had our staff try to find different studies with industry, with the NIH. So really partnering with both to see what is out there that we think is reasonable to try and to bring those studies into our area. So I know we communicated with OSF and the health department, the Mayo Convalescent Plasma Study, we were both participants on. And with other industry studies, we've participated on the Remdesivir data collection. And in addition to that, we're looking at commercial enterprises that are tackling different parts of the disease. So you hear people talk about the cytokine storm, so specific medications and antibodies against specific types of proteins that are pro-inflammatory that may attack the lung. We're participating in those trials. And we're looking at, is COVID an issue regarding clotting? And we're working with the NIH and Duke in a study regarding, do people with COVID-19 require more anticoagulation or blood thinning to allow for better outcomes? With regard to non-for-profits, really working with our health department, communication is key. So the health department, OSF, and us, and the Heartland Clinic in our area, we had regular meetings, sometimes 2-3 times a week. We were coordinating regarding testing, looking at patients, what are next steps, where do people go if they have COVID and they're homeless. All these questions and logistics took partnership with local hotels, which are privately owned, the health department. Joanne Fabrics brought thousands of masks for underserved areas. And to second Dr. Vozenilek, really, I don't want to be in any other country but the US if I'm hit with a pandemic like this. And the American spirit comes through, and that's exactly what I told one of the reporters. They said, what's going to happen with PPE? And what happens when you run out of the masks that you were given by Joanne Fabrics? Reality is the American spirit comes through and innovation comes through. And we've made it quite well. If you think about what happened in Italy and other industrialized countries, we've done quite well, and we've learned from each step, and that's what it takes.
Yeah, thank you. And John Conrad, this is probably going to have to be the last word, unfortunately, but in terms of partnerships, you know, the BIO organization has been very active in promoting the 40th anniversary of the Bayh-Dole Act. Can you speak for a moment to the role of that legislation in creating the capacity for innovation that we have today?
Yeah, so the Bayh-Dole Act is actually just widely hailed as the policy that fostered the U.S. leadership in the life sciences industry, and it spawned a whole kind of generation of scientist entrepreneurs. The key goal of the Bayh-Dole Act was to enable the development and commercialization of new treatments and cures emanating from discoveries made by research institutions, like the ones who are joining us in this panel. Illinois universities really rely on these licensing deals. Over the past 5 years, they've reported more than $1.25 billion in revenue from those deals, which provides much needed revenue for those organizations. The majority of the biomedical industry in the U.S. is made up of small and venture-backed companies who are developing products that have been mostly translated from these universities. If you look at the number of compounds currently looked at for COVID-19, for example, there are 696 compounds. 80% of those are from small companies or originated at small companies. So intellectual property for those companies is their most valuable asset, and in most cases, their only asset. They really rely on strong patent protection and predictability provided by the Bayh-Dole Act to leverage their IP to raise the money they need to bring those products to market. So without the Bayh-Dole Act, without the protection it provides, or even trying to weaken it, really would create an unreliable patent system and undermine incentives for future research and innovation.
Thanks, John. I would note, you know, I think your industry has spent more than $500 billion in the last 10 years building up the capacity to respond to an event like we face today. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank Dr. Sauter, Dr. Vozenilek for their leadership in Illinois and working with partners around the country. We are truly in your debt. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Frank and Josh. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Patrick, and thanks to everyone on the panel. I think it was a fascinating discussion. I think if there's one thing we learned today is we could spend several hours covering these topics, and there's so much important information that needs to be shared with those who are interested in these issues, and of course, everyone who's impacted by those. I'd like to invite the Congressman to either react to any of the comments from the panelists or perhaps to just share some closing thoughts if he has a moment and would like to just once again sort of give his thoughts on where we go from here. Congressman, if you'd like to step back into the discussion, we'd welcome hearing any additional thoughts you may have, and certainly understand if you're unable to do so. I'll turn it over to Joshua for his closing comments. Not hearing the Congressman yet, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the Peoria Area Chamber, Josh Gunn, to help close us out, and then I'll make some last minute comments after Joshua. Joshua?
Yes, Frank, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sauter. Thank you, Dr. Vaz. You know, we are truly blessed and fortunate in Peoria to have such incredible healthcare professionals doing the work that you're doing to help solve for this pandemic, right? That's caught us all off guard, and we're all reacting as quickly as we can. And just truly grateful for your service to this community through both OSF and Unity Point Health, which we are, and the University of Illinois. I can't forget how fortunate we are to have such a great research institution in the state of Illinois. I also want to again thank my staff here at the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce. Special thanks to Sharnika Cagle for responding quickly and helping to organize this very, very important conversation. We had only a couple of days as it is. And, you know, just like the COVID pandemic, things evolve every day, and we have to all be nimble and respond quickly. And I am truly fortunate to work with the staff here at the Peoria Chamber that's able to do that. And so thank you, Sharnika, and thank you to all of our team here. Thank you to the U.S. Chamber for offering us the opportunity to partner on this very important conversation. Thank you, Congressman LaHood. You know, I'm just truly grateful for this conversation. I've learned a ton and feel confident and enthusiastic that we are going to get through this pandemic, and Central Illinois, the Peoria area are going to play a major role in helping this country heal for many years to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. And I can say without hesitation that, again, this would never have happened without you and your great team. Our first call after getting confirmation from Congressman LaHood that he could participate in this conference was to Joshua and his team at the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce. And they're great professionals and have been great partners. And we so appreciate this conversation and all the participants who took time from their busy schedules to both share their insights, but also just to listen to today's discussion. This is an ongoing conversation. We still have a long way to go. But as the Congressman pointed out, it's only going to happen by all of us working together. And we have to work with our businesses, with our constituents and communities to ensure that we truly do have an all-of-nation response to the COVID crisis. So with that, Joshua, again, I can't thank you enough, and also Shanika, your entire professional team, outstanding work. Also to my colleagues at the Chamber, and of course to Congressman LaHood and his terrific staff. I want to thank our panelists for taking time from their super busy schedules to spend a few minutes to share their insights, and remind everyone that we're all here as a resource for you. Please go to our interactive map to check out our Discover and Deliver map on where all these clinical trials and research projects are taken back. And with that, I'll give you back the rest of your day. Hope you all stay safe. And thanks again for being part of today's event. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thanks, everybody.